This is Todd with Baseball Think Tank. Here we have Ryan. This particular outing, Ryan was sitting 91, 92, actually hit 93 a couple times. If you just watch it through fast motion, I'll show you the first thing that caught my attention, Ryan. Okay, if we look at your finish, and I want to talk about this in a couple of areas, one being additional velocity. I mean, geez, you're doing a lot of things great, big, strong body. If you're throwing the ball 91, 92, you're obviously doing a lot of things very well. I have Aroldis Chapman over here on the right. He is, at 100, 105, obviously, does things even better. So looking at you, a 19-year-old who's, 92, my questions are, is there any more left in the tank? Can we get you up in the 95-mile-an-hour range? And secondly, how do we make sure that you have, absolute pinpoint command? Those are the two areas that you're going to find improvement and further success as you grow in the game. And I see a couple of things here, just notably looking at your finish. When we see the weight rolling over onto the ball of the foot, we see you, basically running off the mound. Here's what that tells me. That tells me we had a late shift in weight. Okay, so you're getting into landing. The weight's not there yet. Okay, that's noticed with the back foot. See how you're rolling over on the top of the back foot there, and you're going to see your hips bounce up and over, which tells us your hips aren't able to rotate smoothly around. Your back hip's not able to rotate smoothly around the front hip, and you're going to notice right there's the rest of the rotation, okay? And the only way that can happen is for us to have a stable base in which the hips can finish their rotation, which ideally, if we remember, the summation of the speed principle says that when one segment reaches its maximum angular velocity, in other words, the hip reached their maximum angular velocity, the next segment up, or the torso, then rotates, then the shoulder goes into external rotation. So the thing all works, in sequence, the kinetic chain. Okay, so maximum angular velocity does not necessarily mean, hips are finished rotating. What it means is they reach their peak velocity. So when the pelvis reaches its peak velocity in its rotation is when the trunk should begin to rotate, and then the shoulder should begin its external rotation. But all of that has to end with a stable front side, which allows, that linear motion with the trunk, or the tilting forward, I guess. That's what's going to whip the arm, okay? But because we have late weight shift, okay, we're going into trunk rotation, shoulder external rotation, but our weight is still continuing forward, okay? So we never completely reach that ability to have segmented rotation, okay? Typically what that's caused by is front hip domination on the opening of the hips. Okay, and if you'll remember this key point, the front hip initiates hip rotation, but the back hip accelerates hip rotation. And what I see in you is a very passive back hip, which means we're not reaching that our maximum angular velocity of hip rotation or pelvic rotation is not nearly the speed it could be. In other words, you could rotate the pelvis much faster, okay? In order to do that, we've got to be in a good place for the back hip to accelerate that rotation. Okay, so I want to show you Chapman and just look at a couple of differences here. And I think, with just some simple drills and some, work on it, you can start to find the difference. So we get Chapman going here. Let's see. I actually videoed this off the computer, so not the highest quality, but hopefully we can make the point. So here's Chapman into the delivery. I want you to watch the acceleration. Okay, so the front hip is initiating hip rotation. Now watch the back hip accelerate rotation. And again, this isn't a push towards home plate. I'm not driving my body towards home plate. What he's actually doing here is ripping the hips open. Okay, so he's using front hip is starting to initiate the opening there. The back hip then accelerates that opening as the trunk begins to rotate forward and the shoulder begins to externally rotate backwards. Okay, so his timing is phenomenal, which is why he's throwing the ball as hard as he is. But I want you to see the acceleration of the back hip, how the hips actually clear, okay, leading him into delivery. So, right there after release, his hips are completely rotated, okay? You don't see the hips getting stuck and then bouncing up. They're simply rotating around. Whereas with you, we see the hips get stuck, bounce up, and then finally finish around, okay? So what's the cause of that? It's timing, okay? So if we go back, look at initial leg kick, okay? You get going a little bit compared to Chapman, okay? He gets going, but now watch how the back hip, and typically, we think about guys in the upper 80s, low 90s, if they get stuck there at a plateau. One of the biggest issues is just riding the back hip down the slope of the mound. Mirror the slope of the mound. Okay, get that back hip engaged. Get the body moving towards home plate. Typically, they're, at that velocity range, if they're stuck, they're usually big, strong kids that just don't use the lower half properly. They're strong enough and athletic enough they can throw a ball hard, but they're not continuing to mirror the slope to get the most out of their bodies. So, not even a great angle, but you can see the back hip of Chapman continue to ride down the slope of the mound there, and then it doesn't bounce up, it simply rotates around. You're going to see you start to mirror the slope, and then you come out of it right there. So that's about as far as you get. Then you're going to let the front hip start initiating rotation, but then there's no acceleration from the back hip. So it's a very passive back leg that's allowing you just to fall, but there's nothing driving the hips open. Okay, your upper body, the movements are fine. Okay, but think the faster that back hip accelerates, if we can accelerate that back hip prior to the upper body going, you see accelerate back hip, and look how the body is still loading, the upper body is still loading back at the precise moment that back hip accelerates. Okay, whereas when you accelerate, you're already there. Okay, so again, it's some timing things, it's feeling, the back hip being a little more engaged, riding the slope of the mound a little bit longer here. Okay, we're just coming out of it way too early, which tells me we're very passive on the back leg. Make sure this back foot is screwed in the ground tightly on initiation of leg kick. Let's get that backside active now. Okay, it's got to be active. To me, this looks very passive. We go back and look at Chapman on initiation of leg kick. We see a very active, engaged backside all the way through. Okay, it never stops. Okay, it never stops being active the entire way. Here we see passive, 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 and then we just kind of come out. Now we start to get a little bit active with it, but then, we let the front side take over. So, keys to work on for you, man, get that back foot screwed in the ground tight, initiate back hip movement on initiation of leg kick. I think, just working on the timing of that, thinking about how does my hip accelerate, how does my back hip help accelerate pelvis rotation into the upper body load. Those are things to play around with. Play around with them in your bullpens, play around with them in your heavy ball work, stuff like that. I think you'll start to feel a big difference. All right, man. Hope that helps. Talk to you soon.